From the private journal of Dr. Edmund Calloway, St. Augustine's Hospital, London. Entry dated the 3rd of September, 1887. I have kept this journal since my first year at the University of Edinburgh, where I began my medical training in the autumn of 1861, at the age of 17. In the 26 years since I have used it, as most physicians use such a document as a record of cases that interested me, observations that warranted further examination, reflections on the practice of medicine that did not belong in official correspondence. I have been consistent in this habit through the full breadth of my career, through my residency at St. Bartholomew's and my 10 years as a general physician in Whitechapel, and my current position as senior physician at St. Augustine's, where I have been for the past 7 years, and where I expect to remain for the balance of my working life. I am telling you this because I need you to understand the kind of man who is writing what follows. Not a credulous man, not a man given to fancy or to the various superstitions that pass for wisdom in the parts of this city where medicine has not yet fully penetrated. I am a man who has spent 26 years in the company of evidence, who has trained himself to observe carefully and to draw conclusions proportionate to what the evidence supports, and not a great deal further. I am in the considered opinion of my colleagues, and in my own self-assessment, a rational man. I write this preamble because what I am about to commit to paper is going to challenge every quality I have just described, and I want there to be no ambiguity about the character of the witness. I must begin with Margaret. My wife of 19 years was diagnosed in the spring of this year with a malignancy of the stomach, a diagnosis I made myself in the examination room of our own home on a Tuesday afternoon in late March, with the light coming through the curtains in the way it has in that room that makes everything appear more gently arranged than it is. I have delivered this category of news to perhaps 300 patients and their families over the course of my career. I have developed through long practice the manner and vocabulary appropriate to such deliveries, the balance of honesty and compassion that the situation requires, the ability to provide accurate information without compounding the injury with careless phrasing. I delivered this news to my wife and to myself simultaneously, which is an arrangement for which no amount of professional experience adequately prepares a person. Margaret received it with the particular quiet dignity she brings to difficult things, a quality I have loved in her for 20 years. And that was in this moment the thing in the room that came closest to breaking me. She asked the questions a patient asks. I answered them with the accuracy a physician provides. We sat together for some time afterward without speaking, and the room had the quality of a place where something has just permanently changed. 3 colleagues of mine reviewed her case in the weeks following. I will not reproduce their assessments in detail. The substance was consistent. The tumor was positioned in a manner that made surgical intervention a risk disproportionate to the probable benefit. The available treatments might extend her comfort. The prognosis. In the honest assessment of 3 physicians who had the advantage of not being the patient's husband when they delivered it, was 8 months to perhaps a year. Margaret was 51 years old. I accepted this. I accepted it as a physician accepts a prognosis, which is to say, with the part of the mind that has been trained to receive information without immediately processing it through the emotional apparatus. And I went home and conducted the ordinary activities of an evening dinner with Margaret, a brief visit with our son Henry, who was playing in the nursery with his nurse, the reading of correspondence that had accumulated during a long day at the hospital. I performed all of these activities correctly, and then I went to the study and sat in the chair by the cold fireplace and did not move for several hours, and did not think about anything in a way I could later have described as thinking. This became a habit. 3 or 4 evenings a week, I would find myself in the study after Margaret had retired, sitting in the chair with the lamp burning on the desk behind me, and the fire cold in front of me in the particular non-thinking state that I had by then come to understand as the way my mind managed things it could not process through its ordinary channels. Margaret knew I was doing it and did not ask about it, which was characteristic of her, the intelligence to understand that some forms of difficulty require their own time and the generosity not to interrupt that time with demands for accounting. It was during the 4th or 5th such evening in mid-April that I first became aware that something in the study was different. I will be as precise as I am able to be because precision is the habit I am least willing to abandon even now. The room was the same room it had always been. The furniture was in its usual arrangement. The lamp produced its usual quality of light. The books on the shelves were the books that had always been on the shelves. None of this had changed. What had changed was the character of the darkness in the far corner of the room, the corner behind the armchair, and to the left of the window, a corner that received no direct illumination from the lamp, and that had on all previous evenings been simply dark in the manner of an unlit corner. On this evening it was darker than that. I am aware of how this sounds, and I am reporting it regardless. The darkness in that corner had a quality to it that the room's other shadows did not possess, a density, a presence, a sense of occupied space that is not what one encounters in a simply unlit corner. I observed this for several minutes, applying to the observation the same methodical attention I would apply to an unusual clinical finding, looking for the explanation that would render it ordinary. I did not find one. The darkness spoke. It said my name. Edmund. Not Dr. Calloway, not Doctor, simply Edmund, in a voice that was not loud and that was not threatening in any register I had previously associated with threat. It was the voice of something that had no need of volume or menace because it was entirely confident in its own position. The voice of something making a professional call rather than a personal one, if the distinction makes sense applied to whatever manner of thing I was hearing. I said, "Who is there?" It said, "Someone who is aware of your situation with Margaret." I considered leaving the room. I considered calling out for assistance. I considered the various explanations available to a physician sitting alone in a study at midnight who believes he hears a voice from an empty corner, the explanations relating to fatigue and grief, and the effects of sustained emotional distress on the perceptual apparatus. I considered all of these, and I did not move, and I did not call out, and I did not accept the explanations, because the voice in the corner continued to speak, and its continued speech was not consistent with the explanations. I said, "What do you want?" It said more precisely, "What do you want?" and it waited. What followed was a conversation that lasted, as far as I was able to gauge time during it, approximately 2 hours, though it felt both shorter and longer than that. in the way that time feels during experiences that fall outside the ordinary categories. I will summarize rather than reproduce it, because reproduction would require me to render in language things that the conversation made clear exist at the margins of what language can adequately carry. The entity which gave me no name and to which I shall refer throughout this account as the Presence offered me Margaret's life, not the extension of it that my colleagues had held out as the optimistic end of the spectrum. Her life full and complete, the malignancy resolved as if it had never been there. Her health returned to what it was before March of this year, before the diagnosis, before the slow hollow in my chest where certainty used to be. In exchange, the Presence required what it termed a contribution. Once per year on a date, it would communicate to me in advance I was to allow a patient in my care to die who would otherwise have lived. Not to kill it was precise about this distinction in a way that I later understood was deliberate, but to withhold. To be present in a room where a life could be saved, and to choose not to save it. To exercise the physician's power of intervention by not exercising it. I said no. I said it immediately and without the hesitation that would have indicated genuine consideration. The Presence received this with equanimity. It did not argue, and it did not adjust its terms, and it did not threaten. It simply remained in the corner, and I remained in the chair, and the silence between us had the quality of a space in which the next thing to happen was already determined and was simply waiting for the appropriate moment to occur. After perhaps 10 minutes, I said 1 patient. It said yes. I said per year. It said yes. I said, and Margaret recovers completely. It said yes. I said no again. The Presence waited again. And in the waiting, I thought about Margaret. I thought about her in the examination room, receiving the news with that particular quiet dignity. I thought about her in the evenings, reading by the fire in the manner she had always read, with the book held slightly tilted toward the light and her lower lip pushed forward in the expression of concentration she had always made, and which I had always found inexplicably endearing. I thought about Henry, who was 9 years old, and who had his mother's quality of quiet attention, and who did not yet know what was wrong with her, because Margaret and I had agreed to wait until we understood the situation better before telling him. I thought about the study without Margaret in the house the evenings without the sound of her moving through the rooms above me. The particular silence that would settle into a house when the person whose presence has defined it is no longer there. I said yes. I write this 6 months after that night. Margaret is recovered. Her physicians, my colleagues who reviewed her case in March, have examined her at my request, and have each arrived at assessments they have communicated to me in the language physicians use when the data confounds their expectations. The careful, qualified language of men who have been trained to trust evidence above all things, and who are confronted with evidence that does not correspond to what they know. I have received their assessments with appropriate interest and thanked them for their time and told them nothing. Margaret does not know. She knows that she is well, that the symptoms that had alarmed her and that led to my examination in March are gone, that the follow-up examinations have shown nothing concerning. She has attributed her recovery to the treatment we began in April, which is in fact providing her no medical benefit whatsoever, but which I have maintained because discontinuing it would require explanation. She is well. She is reading by the fire in the evenings. She is herself fully and completely in a way that makes the study feel like a place worth sitting in again. The first contribution occurred in June. I have not written about it, and I am not going to write about it in detail now. I am going to record that it occurred, that I was present, that the patient was a man of 57 with a respiratory condition that had responded well to treatment, and that would have continued to respond if I had continued to manage it in the manner I had established. I am going to record that I did not continue to manage it in that manner, and that the man died on a Thursday morning, and that I wrote the death certificate in the clinical language of a physician, recording a natural conclusion to a natural process, and that I drove home afterward and sat in the study for 3 hours without moving. I told the corner of the room that I would not do it again. I said this aloud to the darkness, which was simply darkness that evening, no quality to it beyond the ordinary. Nothing answered, nothing needed to answer. We both understood, the presence and I, that I had said this, and that the saying of it was permitted and expected, and would not change the architecture of the arrangement. I want to record something that I have not allowed myself to fully think through until this evening, sitting at my desk with the lamp on and the house quiet. Henry came to me last week with something he wanted to tell me, and was uncertain how to tell. He stood in the doorway of the study for a moment before coming in, which is characteristic of him when he has something significant to say. The brief pause of a child gathering the words appropriately. He sat in the chair across from my desk, and he said, "Father, there is something in this room that was not in it before." I asked him what he meant. He said, "I don't know exactly how to say it. Like a smell that isn't a smell. Like knowing someone was just in a room even when you can't see them anymore." He is 9 years old, and he is the most perceptive person I know, which is a thing I have known since he was approximately 4, and which I have always found equally remarkable and inconvenient. I told him he was imagining things. I told him to go to bed. I stood in the hallway after he left, and I listened to his footsteps going up the stairs. And I thought about what a child who perceives the things adults have decided not to perceive might be detecting, and whether what he was detecting was residual, something left in the room by the presence's visits, or something more current and more deliberate. I am afraid of the answer to this question. I am recording the fear because recording things is what I do with information I cannot yet act on. St. Augustine's Hospital, London. Journal of Dr. Edmund Callaway. Entry dated the 17th of March, 1889. I have not written in this journal for nearly 18 months. I resumed it tonight because Margaret found it. She did not tell me she had found it. She did not need to. She came to me this morning in the study where I was reviewing patient notes, and she sat in the chair across from my desk, and she said my name in a tone that told me everything I needed to know about what she had done and what she now knew. I put down the notes and looked at her, and we were both quiet for a time that I cannot accurately measure because time does not move reliably in moments like that one. She said, "Edmund, how long?" I said, "Since April of 1887. She said, "How many?" I said, "Twice." She looked at me for a long time. I have known this woman for 22 years, and I have watched her face work through many kinds of difficulty, and I have learned to read what the different qualities of her expression mean, and what I read in her face during those several minutes of looking was something I could not have named before that moment, and that I am not sure I can name now. It was not hatred. It was not horror, though horror was somewhere in it. It was the expression of someone who has just received information that reorganizes everything they understood about the shape of their own life, and who is in the process in real time in front of you of doing the reorganizing. It was one of the bravest things I have ever watched a person do. She said, "Why did you not tell me?" I said, "Because you would have told me not to do it." She said, "Yes." She said it simply and without accusation, which was worse than accusation would have been. I said, and I was not able to refuse. She said, "You refused the first time." I said, "Yes." She said, "And the second time?" I said, "Yes." She said, "And the third time you said yes?" I said, "Yes." She stood and she walked to the window, and she stood there looking out at the street for a long time. Then she turned and she came back, and she sat down again, and she said, "I need you to listen to what I'm going to say, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." I said I would. She said I would rather have died in November of 1887 than have you do what you have done. I said I understood. She said, "I need you to understand that this is not a statement about the value I place on my own life, which is considerable, but a statement about the cost of this particular preservation of it, which is more than I am able to accept." I said I understood that too. She said, "And I need you to understand that the fact that I would rather have died does not mean I am not glad to be alive, because I am glad to be alive, and I will not pretend otherwise. But gladness and acceptance are not the same thing, and I will not pretend they are either." I did not respond for a while. Then I said, "I know." She said, "Do you?" I said, "Margaret, I have known every day for nearly 2 years." She said, "Then you understand why I am sitting here instead of leaving." I said, "I thought I did." She said, "Because whatever you have done, you are still my husband and Henry's father, and I am not willing to unmake that fact over something that was done in grief and terror and love, even if I cannot forgive it, and I am not yet certain I cannot forgive it." I said I was not certain I could ask for forgiveness. She said then, "We are agreed that certain things are uncertain." She said it with a quality in her voice that was not humor exactly, but was something in the neighborhood of it, the quality she has always had of finding the small absurdity inside the large tragedy. And I looked at her and felt something so large and so complicated that I am not going to attempt to name it. We sat together for a long time. She did not ask me to promise to stop. I did not offer to promise. We both understood the dimensions of what was present between us, and we both understood that promises would be inadequate to those dimensions, and we sat with the inadequacy of it in the way that people who have been married for a long time learn to sit with the things that words cannot address. Henry knocked on the door at 4 o'clock and was admitted and climbed into his mother's lap in the way he still does at 11 years old when he wants to, which Margaret has always encouraged, because she says children should not be hurried out of the things that comfort them. He looked at me over his mother's shoulder with the perceptive dark eyes he has always had, and he said, "Are you all right?" "Father," I said I was. He looked at me for a moment longer in the way he looks at things he is not entirely certain about, and then he accepted the answer and turned back to his mother and began telling her about something that had happened at his lessons that afternoon. I watched the two of them, and I thought about the man in June and about what I had withheld, and about the look on Margaret's face this morning doing its reorganizing, and I thought about what Henry might one day understand about the source of his mother's continued presence in his life, and I thought about the corner of the study and what it wanted. I do not know what it wants with Henry. I am beginning to suspect I know, and the suspicion is not one I am able to fully examine yet, because examining it would require acting on it, and I do not know yet what acting on it would mean. I will write again when I know more. This is the only promise I am currently capable of keeping. St. Augustine's Hospital, London. Journal of Dr. Edmund Callaway. Final entry dated the 4th of March, 1891. I am writing this in the knowledge that it may be the last entry in this journal, not because I intend to stop writing, but because of what I intend to do tonight and the uncertainty of what follows from it. I am leaving this journal where Margaret will find it, which she will because she always finds things I leave where she can find them, and because I want her to have it. I want someone to have the full account. I want there to be a record that says what was done, and what it cost, and what I attempted at the end. Henry is 13 now. He came to me 3 weeks ago with information he could not have obtained through any natural channel, and I confirmed it rather than deny it, because lying to Henry has always been something I am constitutionally incapable of doing with any success. He knows the shape of the arrangement. He does not know the full terms, and I have not given them to him, and will not give them to him because he is 13, and because there are things a child should not carry. But he knows enough. And he looked at me with those perceptive dark eyes, and he said, "Father, are you going to stop it?" And I said yes, and he said, "I know," and he said, "I'm glad." I have been planning this for 6 weeks. I have been methodical about it in the way that I am methodical about difficult things, identifying the variables, considering the possible outcomes, preparing for each of them as best I can. Margaret knows what I am planning. She did not try to stop me. She made me dinner tonight and sat across from me at the table while I ate, and she watched me with an expression that I am going to call love, because that is what it was even in this form, even here, even now. She said, "Edmund, whatever happens tonight, I need you to know that I understand why you did what you did. Not that I accept it because I cannot entirely accept it, but that I understand it and that the understanding has existed in me alongside everything else these past 4 years." I said I knew, she said, "and I need you to know that the 19 years before any of this were the best years of my life." I said they were mine as well, she said, "and the 4 years of this, as terrible as they have been, I have been alive in them, and that matters to me, and I am telling you that it matters because I think you need to hear it." I said I did need to hear it. We finished dinner and she cleared the table and I came up to the study, and I have been sitting at this desk for the past hour, writing this entry and thinking about Henry at 13, with his dark, perceptive eyes, saying I know when I told him I was going to stop it, and about the equanimity of that response, the quality of someone who has expected this and has been waiting for it. I am not afraid. I have been afraid for 4 years, the specific fear of a man who knows exactly what he has done and carries the knowledge of it as a constant companion, and the absence of the fear now is something I cannot entirely distinguish from relief. Whatever happens tonight, the arrangement ends. Whatever I owe for the ending, I am prepared to pay it. The ledger of this family has carried this debt for 4 years, and it ends here. I will not let it go to Henry. I will not let it reach whatever children Henry may one day have. It ends with the man who made it, and that man is me, and that is as it should be. Whatever has lived in the corner of this study for 4 years, I am going to the corner now. I intend to close the account. Hargrove Medical Center, Chicago, present day. The call came at 11:40 on a Wednesday night, which in my experience is when the worst calls always come. The body's resistance to catastrophe is at its lowest in that window between midnight and 3 a.m., and the truth arrives without the softening that daylight provides. My name is Daniel Calloway. I am 44 years old, and I am the chief of oncology at Hargrove Medical Center, and I have been receiving difficult calls for 22 years, and I have developed the capacity to receive them with professional composure, which is different from not being affected by them, and which I want to be clear about because the distinction matters. This call was about my daughter. Elena was 28 years old and a third-year resident in internal medicine at Northwestern Memorial, which is the kind of biographical detail that registers as pride before it registers as anything else. Because it is pride. The specific pride of a physician father whose child has chosen the same work and demonstrated from the beginning that she was more than capable of it. She had her mother's focus and her mother's precision, and a particular quality of sustained attention in difficult situations that I recognized as something neither of her parents had given her, something she had arrived in the world with and developed on her own terms. She was, to put it in the plainest language available, the person whose existence made everything else in my life make sense. The attending at Northwestern was a colleague of mine named Philip, who had the task of delivering this news to someone who understood exactly what it meant. He chose his words with the care of someone who knows that precision without softening is the most respectful form of honesty when the recipient is a physician. He told me what the preliminary blood work showed. He told me what the imaging suggested. He told me they were beginning an aggressive treatment protocol and that they were moving quickly. Acute myeloid leukemia, rapid onset, the kind of presentation that does not allow for the luxury of gradual understanding that arrives and makes its nature immediately clear. I drove to Northwestern in 20 minutes. I sat with Elena for 4 hours. She looked at me with the expression she has always had when she is managing something difficult, the focused inward expression of a person who is converting raw information into actionable plan, which is both one of her best qualities and one of the things that makes her difficult to worry about in the ordinary way, because she does not allow ordinary worry to be useful. At 3:30 in the morning, she told me to go home and sleep. She said it exactly the way she has always said practical, necessary things directly and without negotiation. And I went because she was right, and because she knew she was right, and because arguing with Elena about things she is right about is one of the least productive activities available to me. I went home. I did not sleep. I sat in the study. It is a room I have organized over 20 years into a space where difficult things can be worked through, where the accumulated presence of books and familiar objects and a desk that belonged to my grandfather creates an environment that supports the kind of thinking that ordinary spaces do not. The desk was Edmund Calloway's desk. It came to me through my father, who received it from his father, who was Edmund's son, Henry. I have always worked at it with the vague sense of continuity that inherited objects provide the awareness of hands that used it before mine, and work that was done at it before my work. I sat at it at 4 in the morning the day after Elena's diagnosis, and I attempted to think, and found that what was available to me instead was the suspended state that precedes thinking, the processing pause the mind takes when it encounters something that exceeds the capacity of its ordinary tools. The far corner of the study became different. I want to be precise. I am a physician and a scientist, and precision is not a professional habit, but a fundamental orientation toward the world, the way I encounter information and evaluate it. The corner had always been an unlit corner. On this night, it was something more than that. The darkness there had a quality that the rest of the room's shadows did not possess, a density and a presence and a quality of occupied space that my visual processing identified as different before my conscious reasoning could account for why. I sat with the difference for several minutes, applying to it the same methodical attention I apply to unusual clinical presentations. I did not find the explanation that would have rendered it ordinary. A voice spoke from the corner. It said my name. Daniel. Just my name, the way you say a name when you are establishing specifically who you are speaking to. The voice was not frightening in any of the registers I would previously have associated with fear. It had the quality of a professional making a professional inquiry, calm and direct, and entirely confident in its own legitimacy. I said, "Who is there?" It said, "Someone who knew your grandfather." I knew immediately what it meant, which I acknowledge is strange. But I had read Edmund Calloway's journal as a young man, the original document that had come down through the family with the desk, and the medical instruments and the photographs. And the final entries of that journal had always stayed with me in the way that documents stay with you when they are describing something the writer cannot bring themselves to fully name. I had read those final entries as the output of a mind under severe stress, the product of grief and overwork, and the particular psychological strain of watching a beloved person die slowly. I had given them the generous interpretation that the family consensus had always given them, that Edmund was a brilliant man who had been broken by his wife's illness, and whose brilliance had turned inward, and strange in the breaking. I looked at the corner and revised this interpretation. I said, "Tell me about my grandfather." What followed was long and precise, and delivered with the unhurried clarity of something that had been waiting a considerable time to deliver it. The entity which gave me no name, and which I will refer to as the presence throughout this account, in the same manner I believe Edmund referred to it in his own, confirmed the shape of what Edmund's journal had described, the arrangement he had made in April of 1887, the terms, the 6 contributions he had made before the final entry in March of 1891. what Edmund had done on the night of that final entry and what the consequences had been. It told me all of this with the equanimity of something providing relevant background information before making its current proposal. I said he tried to end it. The presence said yes. I said, and what happened? It said that Edmund Calloway had died in July of 1891, and that the terms of the arrangement, while restructured by his termination of it, had not been cancelled. It said that the arrangement had been in suspension since 1891, awaiting the appropriate moment to be revisited. It said that Elena's diagnosis was the appropriate moment. I said you caused Elena's illness. It said no. It said Elena's illness was entirely natural and entirely independent of any action on its part, and that this was in fact why the moment was appropriate, because the distress I was experiencing was genuine and unmanufactured, and the offer it was about to make would be received with the authenticity that genuine distress produces. I said, "What are you offering?" It told me, "Elena's recovery. Complete total without recurrence. The leukemia resolved in a manner that her physicians at Northwestern would find remarkable and would not be able to explain. In exchange, once per year on a date, it would communicate to me I would allow a patient in my care to die who would otherwise have survived. Not to kill, to withhold. To be present in a room where a life could be saved, and to choose not to save it." I said no. It waited. The equanimity of its waiting was itself a kind of pressure. Not the pressure of threat, but the pressure of patience, the communication of something that had enough time to allow me to arrive at my own conclusions without assistance. I thought about Elena at 3:30 in the morning telling me to go home and sleep because I would be useless otherwise. I thought about her Christmas lists, which she sends every year in November, organized by neighborhood with notes on reservation requirements because she manages her love for people by removing the obstacles between them and things they want. I thought about a phone call 3 weeks ago in which she described a case she was managing and asked my opinion on a treatment decision and listened to my opinion and then told me why she disagreed with 2 aspects of it and was correct about both aspects, and I had said so, and she had said good because I needed an honest answer, not a diplomatic one. I thought about what it would cost me to lose her. I said 1 patient. It said yes. I said per year. It said yes. I said, and Elena recovers completely. It said yes. I said no a second time. And then I sat with the shape of what I was refusing, and I said, "Tell me about my grandfather's son, Henry. What happened to Henry?" It told me that Henry Calloway had been aware of the arrangement from an early age, in the manner of perceptive children who detect things that the adults around them believe successfully concealed. It told me that Henry had not been approached, that the arrangement did not pass automatically to subsequent generations, that each generation encountered it fresh in its own time, under its own circumstances. I sat with this. The lamp was on, and the study was the study, and my grandfather's desk was solid under my hands, and the corner of the room was simply darker than it should have been, and I sat with the offer in the way you sit with the thing that you have already decided, and that you are waiting for yourself to acknowledge you have decided. I said yes. I am writing this 11 months later. Elena is in full remission. Her physicians at Northwestern have reviewed her case multiple times and have communicated their findings to me in the careful, qualified language of people confronting data that does not correspond to their expectations. I have received these communications with appropriate professional interest. I have told them nothing. Elena does not know. She is completing her 3rd year of residency. She called me last week to discuss a research project she is beginning in the new year, a study on early detection markers in hematological malignancies, which is the kind of research that will improve outcomes for people in the situation she was in 11 months ago. She talked about it with the focused intensity she brings to things that matter to her genuinely and not just professionally. I listened and asked questions, and she answered the questions and then asked me questions in return. And we talked for 40 minutes about research methodology, and I drove home afterward in the knowledge that she was alive and well, and beginning work that would help other people live, and that this was the condition of things and what it had cost to make it the condition of things. The first contribution occurred in February. I have not written about it, and I am not going to write about it in detail now. I will record that it happened, that the patient was a woman of 61 with a cardiac condition that had responded well to the treatment protocol I had established and that would have continued to respond had I continued to manage it in the manner I had established. I will record that I did not continue to manage it. I will record that she died on a Tuesday afternoon and that I wrote the attending notes in the precise clinical language of a physician documenting a natural progression, and that I drove home afterward and sat in the study for several hours and spoke to the corner of the room, which was simply a corner of the room that evening, and told it that I would not do this again. The corner did not answer. The corner did not need to answer. I have been reading Edmund's journal again more carefully than I read it when I was young. There is material in it that I did not properly register on earlier readings, passages in the later entries that require the context of my current situation to fully understand. There is a passage from September of 1889, 2 years after the arrangement began, in which Edmund describes standing in the kitchen of his house at night, unable to sleep, and the feeling he was experiencing standing there, and the fact that he could not name the feeling. I read this passage when I was 23 and thought it was the description of grief. I read it now and understand it as the description of something else. The feeling of carrying a thing that cannot be put down and cannot be shared with the person who most deserves to know about it, and knowing both of these facts simultaneously. I know this feeling. It is the primary texture of my current existence, which is otherwise very good. Elena is well. I am doing work I believe in. I have the ordinary satisfactions of a life that has its proportions mostly correct. The feeling exists inside all of this as a constant element, not overwhelming, not paralyzing, simply present. The way chronic pain is present in someone who has learned to function alongside it. I have been thinking about what Edmund wrote in his final entry. The ledger of this family has carried this debt long enough. I intend to close it. He did not close it. He died in July of 1891 at the age of 47, and the arrangement went into suspension until November of last year. 30 years. Then the appropriate moment arrived, and the suspension ended, and the arrangement resumed with his grandson. The debt did not end when Edmund ended it, or rather the ending Edmund attempted did not produce the ending he intended. I am thinking about this distinction. I am thinking about it carefully because it is the most important piece of information I have, and because acting on information without fully understanding it is a habit I have spent 22 years training myself out of. Elena called me on Thursday. She wanted to tell me about a patient she had been managing, a 43-year-old man with a condition that had presented unusually and whose case she had found challenging in ways she wanted to talk through. She described the case. I listened. She asked what I would have done at the decision point where she had found herself uncertain. I told her. She thought about it and said she saw the logic, but that she thought my approach would have missed a secondary factor that turned out to be significant. She was right. I said so. She said she knew I would have caught it. Eventually, she just wanted to make sure I said so explicitly rather than implicitly. I said she was exactly as relentless as her mother had been. She said she took that as the compliment it was intended to be. After we hung up, I sat at Edmund's desk and I thought about the Calloway family and about what gets passed down through generations and what form it takes in the passing. I thought about Henry Edmund's son, who was 13 when Edmund wrote his final entry, and who understood even at 13 that his father was going to do something irreversible, and who said, "I know," in response to being told, and I'm glad. I thought about what Henry had known and what he had done with the knowing for the rest of his life. I called a colleague at the University of Chicago last week, a woman named Dr. Frances Park, who holds a joint appointment in the medical school and the Department of History of Medicine, and who has spent 30 years studying the intersection of medical practice and cultural belief systems across historical periods, which is a field that sounds academic and is, in fact, one of the most practically useful areas of scholarship I have encountered. I have known Frances for 15 years, and I trust her judgment and her discretion completely. I told her I was researching something and needed her to tell me everything she knew about historical accounts of medical practitioners entering into arrangements with entities that offered healing in exchange for harm. I framed it as historical research. She did not ask why I was conducting historical research outside my specialty. She is too intelligent to ask questions like that when the answer is obvious. She told me considerably more than I expected. She told me these accounts were consistent across cultures and historical periods in ways that suggested either a genuine underlying phenomenon or a pattern of human psychological response to the extremity of grief that produces consistent symbolic expression, and that she had long since stopped being certain which of these explanations she preferred. She told me the consistent elements of the accounts the entity approaching during a period of maximum vulnerability, the offer involving the survival of someone. The practitioner could not bear to lose the annual contribution required, the impossibility of terminating the arrangement from the inside without consequences that the accounts described in various ways, but that were uniformly severe. She told me about several cases in which practitioners had attempted termination and about what had happened to them. I asked her if any case in the historical record had produced a successful termination. She was quiet for a moment. She said there were 3 accounts she knew of that described something she would hesitantly characterize as success. She said in each case the success was partial, that the practitioner had died, but that the arrangement had genuinely ended with the death, rather than being passed forward. She said the element common to all three accounts was that the termination had been performed with what she described, choosing her words carefully, as a complete absence of self-preservation as a motivating factor. Not suicide, she was clear about this. Not a passive acceptance of death, but an active action taken in the full knowledge that the action would be fatal, motivated entirely by the desire to end the thing rather than to survive the ending of it. I said, "Did any of them survive?" She said no. I said, and the arrangement ended. She said in these three accounts, yes. I thanked her and said I had found what I was looking for, and she said she hoped so, and she said to call her if I needed anything else, and I said I would, and I ended the call and sat for a long time with what she had told me. Elena is spending Christmas in Chicago this year. She has sent me a list of restaurants organized by neighborhood with notes on reservations. 7 restaurants because she always sends more options than she intends to use to allow for scheduling flexibility. The list is on my phone and I have looked at it many times in the past week. Not because I need to review the choices, but because looking at it is a way of being in contact with the fact of her, the specific and irreplaceable fact of Elena alive and well, and planning Christmas dinner with the practical thoroughness she brings to everything she plans. I have been thinking about Edmund standing in the kitchen in 1889 and feeling something he could not name. I know what he was feeling. I am going to write it down now because Edmund did not, and I think the naming of it matters. It is the feeling of loving someone so completely that the love has become a thing you are living inside rather than a thing you are experiencing. A structure rather than a sensation, and knowing that the structure was built on something that will eventually require it to collapse, and knowing that the collapse will come, and that when it comes, the person you built it for will learn what it was built on, and that the learning will be its own kind of loss, separate from the physical loss and in some ways worse. I am not going to let Elena learn what this was built on. I am not going to let the arrangement reach Elena. I am writing in Edmund's journal, which is where I have been writing since I retrieved it from the archive where the family papers are kept and brought it home 2 months ago. I am writing in the pages after his last entry, continuing his account, because it seems correct to keep the record in one place, and because the desk was his desk, and the journal was his journal, and what I am carrying is in some measure what he was carrying, and the continuity seems honest. I have decided what I am going to do. I have been methodical about the planning in the way I am methodical about difficult things, which is Edmund's approach, and which I inherited from him through the family and through the profession. I have identified the variables. I have considered the outcomes. I have prepared for them as best I can. There is one thing I need to do before I finish this entry. I am going to write Elena a letter and put it in the back of this journal where she will find it when she finds the journal, which she will, because Elena finds things. I am going to tell her what she needs to know and what she needs to do with the knowing. I am going to tell her about the restaurants. Margaret sat across from Edmund at dinner on the last night and told him that the 19 years before everything were the best years of her life and that she wanted him to know it. I do not have a Margaret. I have Elena, and Elena is not going to know until after, which means I cannot tell her across a dinner table. I am going to tell her in a letter, and I am going to make it as specific and as honest as I can, because I am my grandfather's grandson, and I do not know how to do things in any other way. The lamp is on. The study is quiet. Edmund's desk is solid under my hands the way it has always been solid, the way things are solid when they have been used for honest work for a long time and have absorbed the quality of the honesty into their substance. The corner of the room is simply a corner of the room tonight. This will change. When it changes, I will be ready. I intend to close the ledger. Edmund could not close it. I am going to close it. No child should pay for what their parent could not put down. I am writing this down so that Elena has it, so that the record exists, so that when she reads this journal she understands what was done and why and what I did at the end to make sure the debt did not reach her. She will be angry. She will be angry in the specific and righteous way she is angry when someone she loves has done something she would not have allowed if she had known about it, which is a quality I have always found both difficult and wonderful in her. She will be angry, and she will be right to be angry, and eventually I hope she will understand. She is going to spend Christmas in Chicago. She has a list of 7 restaurants organized by neighborhood. The first one in Wicker Park is the right choice. The one in River North is overrated, and she does not know this yet. She will have to find out on her own. I am going to go to the corner of the study now. Whatever is in it, whatever it requires of me to end this, I am going to give it. Not because I am unafraid, because I am afraid, but because fear and the correct action have never been mutually exclusive in my experience, and 22 years of medicine has given me considerable experience with the distinction. The Calloway family has carried this debt since April of 1887. 137 years. It ends tonight. I am a physician. I have spent 22 years believing that the proper study of the natural world, properly pursued, yields to rational explanation. I still believe this. What I have expanded is my understanding of what the natural world contains. It ends tonight. Letter found folded inside the back cover of the Calloway Family Journal, written in a hand consistent with the modern entries. Elena, if you are reading this, several things have happened. The journal you are holding will explain most of them. I need you to read it in full before you read this letter, because the context matters, and I want you to have it. What I need to say to you directly is this. Whatever was in the corner of my study offered you something. I believe it will have made this offer, or will make it, because this is the pattern, and the pattern is consistent. The answer is no. I need you to say no the first time, and no the second time, and no every time after that. I need you to say it, even though the thing in the corner will be patient with your refusal, and will wait for you to change your mind, and will not threaten you, and will not pressure you, and will simply be there in the corner with its equanimity, which is the most frightening thing about it. The answer is no. The ledger is closed. I am closing it. Whatever it costs to close it, the cost stops with me and does not reach you. This is the commitment I am making in this letter because written commitments, in my experience, are harder to abandon than spoken ones, and because I need you to hold me to it, regardless of what happened. Your great-great-grandfather Edmund wrote at the end of his last journal entry that the ledger of this family had carried its debt long enough and that he intended to close it. He could not close it. I believe I understand why he could not, and I believe I understand what closing it actually requires, and I have done what it requires. The debt ends here. There are things I want you to know that I would have told you in person if the circumstances had arranged themselves differently. You are the best physician I have known in 22 years of knowing physicians, and I have known excellent physicians. You are better than I was at your age, and you will be better than I am now, and this is one of the things in my life that has made me most straightforwardly glad. You are exactly as relentless as your mother was. I say this as the compliment it is. The restaurant in Wicker Park is the right choice. The one in River North is overrated. You would have found this out on your own, but I wanted to tell you so you have it from me. You have been for 28 years the reason everything else made sense. This remains true. It will remain true regardless of what the corner of any study contains, or what anything that speaks from corners of studies tells you about the cost of keeping it true. Some things do not have a price that changes them. You are one of them. The ledger is closed. I love you, Dad.